We do begin tonight with the president signing into law a $600 million bill to increase security along the U.S.-Mexico border. It's an effort to toughen border enforcement, even though, as Mr. Obama's Homeland Security Secretary pointed out today, the fact is that the problem of illegal immigration, as reflected in immigration enforcement, the problem hasn't actually gotten any worse over the last decade.
Everything that is supposed to be going up is going up, and everything that is supposed to be going down is going down. Seizures are up and rose across the board last year. Apprehensions or illegal crossings are down.
It is sort of taboo to say these days. It's at least against the common wisdom. But the illegal immigration problem in America is not actually getting worse. It's just that the people who like to say it's getting worse, despite the facts, are complaining about it a lot louder now. And as their complaints get louder and louder and louder, despite the facts, their complaints are starting to get stranger, too. In our newsroom here at our offices, I can't watch it because I'm really, really easily visually distracted. What? But everybody else who works on the Rachel Maddow show, everybody else who works like in our little newsroom hub, always has all of the other cable networks on during the day to monitor the news. I don't, but I'm easily distracted. And I was walking past one of our banks of monitors one day this week, and I just stopped dead in my tracks in front of this on CNN. Terror babies! That was the topic of discussion on Anderson Cooper's CNN show last night. Terrorist babies. Really? Hats off to Mr. Cooper, actually, for discussing and debunking this conspiracy theory. But the theory itself is amazing. The idea is that very far-sighted terrorist foreign ladies are coming to America to have babies here. Why are they doing that? They're doing that to get their terrorist spawn born in America, so that the terrorist baby will be born as a U.S. citizen. Then the terrorist baby will toddle home and be raised as a terrorist toddler, and then a terrorist child, and then a terrorist teenager, and so on. And eventually it will come back over here 20 or so years later and use its terrorist baby American passport to enter our country and carry out terrorist attacks. Ta-da! These very, very far-sighted terrorist uterus-wielding ladies are not apparently supposed to be terrorists themselves. They are just terrorist baby incubators. They are terrorist baby-mommas. As far-fetched as the terrorist babies theory may seem. I know, right? It's the latest anti-immigration point of hysteria on the right. And I do, again, hats off to Anderson Cooper. He ably debunked this. But nevertheless, the terrorist baby theory is still being given a voice on the floor of Congress.
They would have young women who became pregnant, would get them into the United States to have a baby. They wouldn't even have to pay anything for the baby. And then they would return back where they could be raised and coddled as future terrorists. And then one day, 20, 30 years down the road, they could be sent in to help destroy our way of life.
See, you thought I was exaggerating. You thought that I was using hyperbole. I was making it sound more kooky than it is. When Louis Gohmert says it, he actually makes it sound more crazy than me paraphrasing it. They wouldn't even have to pay anything for the baby, he says. Then they would return back where they could be raised and coddled as future terrorists. Terrorist babies. Sure, they look like babies. Clearly, we have to repeal the 14th Amendment. So babies born here, any babies, are no longer U.S. citizens to protect us from the terrorist babies. It's amazing. You know, fear is a tried and true political strategy, scaring people about foreign threats, the threats posed to you in your way of life by people who look different than you, no matter how tiny those people are. It is a well-worn strategy in conservative politics to stoke fear like this. The problem is that trying to scare the electorate about immigrants in particular is always a tempting strategy for conservatives, but it never really pays off. At least it doesn't anymore. It doesn't seem to work that well anymore, electorally speaking. And that's because demographically, it's dumb. In 2004, exit polls showed that a whopping 44% of Hispanics cast their ballots for Republicans. 2 years later, when the anti-immigration rhetoric got too tempting again for conservative politicians, when the anti-immigrant be afraid stuff got ratcheted back up, that number cratered to 29%. Republicans managed to make up a little ground in 2008, taking 31% of the Hispanic vote. But any white voters that Republicans picked up from the be afraid of the scary brown people strategy, they were not enough to prevent a huge drubbing for the Republican Party that year. Now, the people who are trying to scare white people for political gain aren't strategically stupid. I mean, they've seen these numbers too. Anti-immigrant politicking feels good to a party that likes to run on fear, but anybody can tell it doesn't work. Just ask President Tancredo. Smart Republicans know how to read these numbers. This is not a mystery. You will hear smart Republicans articulate that same phenomenon that I just described. Republicans know this, but so how come they keep going back to the anti-immigrant stuff in election years? What else could be driving them to these harsh anti-immigration policies, despite their best electoral interests? Well, last night on this show, we talked about how one of the unheralded direct impacts of Arizona's Papers, Please law is that it would have, in all likelihood, put millions of dollars per month into the hands of the private prison industry, specifically a private prison company called the Corrections Corporation of America. CCA holds the contract to imprison federal detainees in Arizona. How do you get to be a federal detainee in Arizona? Well, when you're picked up in Arizona and you get detained on an immigration charge, that means you get sent to a CCA prison, which is a for-profit entity that gets paid by the government to hold you. CCA could potentially reap huge financial benefits from Arizona Governor Jan Brewer signing SB 1070, since 1070 was designed to lock up a lot more people in Arizona on federal immigration charges. Cha-ching! And that is really convenient given that two of Governor Brewer's top advisors have direct connections to the Corrections Corporation of America. As the CBS affiliate KPHO first reported, and we talked about last night, Governor Brewer's deputy chief of staff used to be a lobbyist for CCA. His wife is currently a registered lobbyist for CCA. Also, one of Governor Brewer's policy advisors, the man who runs her campaigns, owns a firm that represents CCA. So Governor Brewer signing SB 1070 into law, which again would result in more immigrants being arrested and detained, potentially benefiting this prison company linked to a pair of her advisors in a very big way. Now it turns out there is an even more direct link between SB 1070 and the private prison industry, which stands to benefit from SB 1070. Do you remember who introduced SB 1070 in the first place? Somewhere deep in your memory bank on this issue is the name Russell Pierce. He's the Republican state senator in Arizona who pushed through SB 1070. It was really his baby. Russell Pierce is chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee in Arizona. He's a powerful guy in the state legislature. And his connections to the industry that is licking its chops at the prospect of more arrested immigrants and therefore more profit in Arizona, his connections to that industry are even more stark than those of Jan Brewer. Joining us now to explain is the reporter who's been